Our family loves to travel. And so setting apart the time to travel and to go experience what this world has to offer. So there was one time where I took 6 weeks off of work and my wife and I went on a trip around the world.
Wow.
And so
in this episode, you'll get to know John Murphy, the Fintech bank examiner. And you'll hear the story of how his persistence led to an internship in the Scottish Parliament and later a successful career working for the U.S. government. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is my Success Project. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. This is a show where I teach my children how to be successful through the life stories of others, but you get to come along for the ride no matter what your age is. In case it's your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. With this show, I wanted to create a bit of a legacy, something that would help my family succeed, but I thought you'd enjoy learning along with them. I speak to some of the most successful people I've met in my life's journey, people who have achieved not just career or financial success, but multifaceted success in many areas in their lives. And in these interviews, you and I together were looking for universal principles of success that you can apply in your life and career right now. So with every episode, I ask people to do one thing. I want you to look for something you can do, because it's not just about the knowledge that you gain or how entertained you are by their story, but it's about the action that you take on the knowledge that you gain. Now, just a disclaimer before we dive into this. My guest today works for the FDIC. That's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation of the U.S. government. We'll explain that later on. But it's really important for me to say that we won't be able to dive into the policies or practices of the FDIC. And anything that he shares during this is his own opinion, his own perspective, and not those of the FDIC or the U.S. government. So what we'll be doing in this episode is focusing on John's career story, it's really fascinating. And we'll talk about how he was able to carve out a long and successful career as a bank examiner. So with that said, my guest today is John Murphy. He is a supervisory examiner for the FDIC. He's been in the finance industry for over 15 years and is considered a subject matter expert in the area of Fintech, which is short for financial technology. He's also an expert in marketplace lending partnerships, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain-related activities. John has worked with banks across the country, assessing their risk management practices and providing formal training to those banks and their examiners. He's a speaker at regulatory financial conferences. John obtained a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Utah and lives in Salt Lake City with his wife and 2 children. John, I'm so excited to talk to you today.
yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm not going to lie, Dave. I feel very humbled and I'm very excited to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. We talked about that, and I appreciate your humility. But you've had a fascinating career, and I'm really looking forward to diving into it and getting a taste of how you got to the place that you are. And I always like to ask, where are you located today? What part of the world are you in?
So right now I am in Bountiful, Utah.
Okay. And for those who aren't familiar, John is like really close to me. I also live in Utah in the Salt Lake City area. So we're pretty darn close to each other right now. So I always like to start with the question, John, of where did you begin? And usually the easiest question to do that with is, what did you want to be when you grew up? And I'm not talking about, when you're like 5 years old and you want to be a fireman. I'm talking about as you started to form your ideas in high school, what did you think you were going to be doing when you grew up?
Initially, Dave, I thought for sure I was going to be an actor. That's what I wanted to do. Yeah. So pretty early on in junior high, a buddy of mine had invited me to come try out for some community theater. And so I did that. I tried out, I auditioned, and I basically got like a chorus part.
What was the show?
It was called Little Abner.
Oh gosh, that's old school, right?
It is. It's very old school. I never heard of it before, but I was cast as a husband, which I was pretty shocked at the time because I'm pretty small in stature as it is. But a week into it, the assistant director came to me and said, "Hey, someone dropped out of the play, and I'm just wondering if you would like a different part." And I was like, anything to not be a husband, because I just don't feel like that. Like I fit that, right?
Sure.
But it turned out that the part that she was giving me his name was Available Jones, and he was a supporting lead in the play. And so right off the bat, it kind of threw me into acting. I had to learn to be somewhat different. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed diving into this different personality of who this character was and playing it. We'd like you to come try out for our acting agency.
Wow.
And yeah, I was not expecting that. And so I talked to my mom. We went and got headshots and did some cold readings, and they brought me on.
So did that result in anything? I mean, I know sometimes that happens and then you audition for parts and nothing really comes of it. I actually did a little bit of that when I was a kid. I never got anything from it. So did it yield something for you?
The short answer is no. But
okay.
and what happened is they got me this audition for an Arctic Circle commercial. And one of the reasons they really liked me is because I looked so young, but I was older. And so I had this maturity to play parts that were younger, but that I was easily directable.
And let me insert something here for those who are not familiar with the Salt Lake City area. Arctic Circle is like a low-rent McDonald's chain here in the Utah area, right? It's good. It's good. They make good shakes and good fries. But, it's a burger chain, right?
Yeah, but hey, I was excited just to get this audition, but it was, and I remember it was for the halogen flashlights in the kids sack. So they wanted this kid.
Those are great. Yeah.
Yeah. Under the bed, and he was going to shine this halogen flashlight in his face and say these lines, right? And so I was all prepared. I had the lines memorized. I was set to go. But my entire leading up to that point, all I had ever done is community theater, and I was not prepared. I got stuck in this room. They set me down and they said, pretend you're under this bed. And then this big camera, right? Those big movie cameras came in. I'd never seen a camera that big in my life. And they pushed record and that red light went on and I became a deer in the headlights. And I just froze. And then I hurried and said my lines, and they were like, oh, like, let's try that again. And they gave me another shot, and I did that. And yeah, I just panicked. I panicked and I said it again, and I just want to get out of there. I was like, I was not prepared for that. So I came out and I was a little bit embarrassed because my mom had spent quite a bit of money on, and we were poor growing up. So I come from a family where there's 7 kids. There's a lot of us.
And where were you in the order?
I was right in the middle. I was the middle child. Okay. And I just thought, my parents don't have a lot of money or a lot of time. So I got to really take this serious. And I said, okay, do I want to make a career out of this? Is this what I want to do? And I started looking and saying, all these famous actors, they're very wealthy, but they don't really have a private life. Everything they do is very public. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for my family, is for everything to just be blasted if I were to ever get to that point. And so, even at that younger age, I said, although I enjoy acting, I've decided that's not something I want to pursue as a career, especially if it's going to absorb all of these resources for my parents. And so I turned away from that.
Okay. So you mentioned that you felt that your family was poor. What indicators did you have that was the case? Were you aware of that? Or is that something that you realized later on?
I was pretty aware of it. Most of the kids around me, every school year, they got brand new clothes. And I just got hand-me-downs for the most part. And if I wanted to buy something new, I had to earn the money to purchase it myself. And we also had subsidized lunches at school. And I remember kind of getting teased about that. And, oh, you guys don't have enough money just to buy the pizza from the a la carte line that was like $1. And so I realized pretty early on that, and I just knew that there was a lot of kids and mouths to feed. So I kind of assumed, well, we have a bigger family than some of you guys, and maybe that's the case.
Okay. And it sounds, though, that your parents were very dedicated to you and your siblings. What were some of the values that they gave you that help you today?
2 things that I will be forever grateful for from my mom, because my dad, he had to travel a lot for work. So he was gone a lot growing up. And so it was my mom a lot of the time handling us. And she was adamant that we understood the importance of grades. And so she set a rule that if any of us ever got a C+ or lower on any subject, that we would be grounded for 6 months.
Wow.
We wouldn't be able to play because she said, I know that you guys are smart enough to get better grades than that. And so maybe you just need to cut out the distractions to make sure that you get these good grades. And so we took getting good grades very seriously because we didn't want to not see friends for 6 months. And the second thing was hard work. And we always had chores assigned that we had to do. And my mom was very serious about that. And if we didn't do a good job, we had to do it all over again. We really learned to do a job and to do it well because there could be repercussions for not doing it well.
Yeah, that's pretty intense. I mean, do you continue that with your children now, or do you temper it just a little bit and not quite go to that point? Where do you fall on that spectrum? No matter what your career is, your foundation of success begins with one thing: effective time management. And thanks to the generosity of Microsoft, you can get my entire course, Time Management Fundamentals, for free on LinkedIn Learning. Go to davegift.com to get your free access now. This is the course that millions around the world have used to become more productive and reduce stress. Everyone from Fortune 500 executives to freelancers to students. Now, it's the same coaching I've provided in person for tens of thousands of dollars per day, but you can get it for free on LinkedIn Learning. You don't need to provide anything to access it. No credit card, no email. Just go to davegift.com and start learning. Thank you so much, Microsoft and LinkedIn Learning, for your partnership. davegift.com.
I temper it, but I do make sure that they do a good job and they understand that if you're going to do something, you need to do it right. And you should try your hardest to do it right the first time, because if you do it right the first time, it just saves so much time and energy and angst.
Yeah, that's so true. So what is it that you do, John, to teach your children? They're pretty young. How old are your children right now?
I have a 2-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter.
Okay, so still pretty young. Are there things that you're doing to teach them some of the values of work and money at this young age?
Yeah, so one of the things that having grown up poor and understanding the importance of money, I wanted to instill that in my kids. And so we kind of started getting some financial literacy books, but that were made for kids. And so started to read some of those to them.
So what's one of those books?
One of them is called Rock, Brock, and the Savings Shock. And
okay.
It's about these two brothers, and they earn the same amount of money, but then one saves, and it talks about compounding interest. Like that's one of the big things about that it teaches is when you save in that compounding interest and how much more money you get at the end compared to someone who just saves and what they're able to purchase. And it's been really helpful for my daughter because we used to take her to the store and she would see candy or she'd see this stuffed animal and she'd want it and we would say no, and she would throw these fits. But then as we started reading this book to her and teaching her about that things cost money and that we started giving her chores where she could earn money. And it's been very interesting, Dave. Initially, she would buy that thing immediately, but over time now she started to say, maybe I don't want that. I'm going to save for something maybe that I want more. And it's been really exciting and fun to see that mentality shift in her.
Yeah, especially as a finance guy, that's got to be especially rewarding, right?
Yes, very proud, very proud.
Yeah, we've done something similar with our kids. Someone suggested we have jars for their money, and so there's the savings jar, there's their fun jar, there's like their charity jar. We have better names for them, but basically they've gotten in the habit from a very early age. And my son just recently, he was 18. We've been doing this with him since he was probably about 6. And we sat down and we looked at his accounts recently. And he was like, wow, I didn't realize I had that much money, thousands of dollars, an 18-year-old. And he even said, now I know why you had me do this, to create those jars, because now that's just a habit. He always does that. And it sounds like you're creating that same thing for your children.
I think that's wonderful that you're doing that, Dave. And that's what I really am trying to instill in my kids is making it a habit that you don't even think about it. And when you don't think about it and you kind of put it to the side, it allows for that compounding interest, or, that to accrue over time. And then all of a sudden you do look and you do have that moment of realization of, wow, that's incredible how much money this is, or where this has gotten to. And I hadn't even thought about that. And I think that's wonderful. And that teaching people, and not just kids, but at any age of life, truly understanding personal finance, that's a big deal. That's a big deal for me.
So let's use that as a transition. You thought you were going to be an actor. Where did you start to enter into the finance area of things? Did that start as you started to go into college, or did that come later?
I was the operations manager of a eclectic furniture store in Salt Lake. I was working there, and I wanted a change of pace. And I realized working at that job, I learned a lot of skills there and a little bit more about finance. But I was like, this isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. I need to look some different opportunities. And this internship popped up that I could apply for. So I applied for it. I got denied. I called the lady and I said, hey, I really feel like I'd be a solid candidate for this. She said, we've already selected our candidate. I gave it a week. I called her again and said, I really would like you to consider, or is there anything, I just felt like this was something I really wanted to do. And it was interesting because she said no again. And I said, okay, that was so interesting because I just felt like that was right. 3 days after that second turn down, she called me back and said, this candidate actually dropped out. There were other candidates we were considering, but you've been so proactive in demonstrating how much you really want this that we would like for you to go now. So that was through the University of Utah, where I was attending at the time. Okay. And so they had a relationship. So how that internship kind of worked is they had built a relationship with one of the political parties there. And so I got assigned to just be an intern in the Scottish Parliament with this particular.
Had you lived out of the country prior to that point?
Yes. So I had lived in Spain for a couple years before then. So okay. I was familiar with Europe in general. And so it wasn't out of my comfort zone there, but the sticker shock and everything was pretty drastic. And I remember I was just making copies and I didn't feel like I was really learning much. I did learn a lot about the political system out there, which was very unique compared to our political system here in the US. And I found that fascinating. I learned a lot about that. And then I got really lucky in that the political party leader at the time needed help in his constituency as he was running. And so they said, hey, why don't we ship you out over there? You're pretty outgoing. Why don't you get out there and help those guys? So I started doing canvassing, going to these rallies and talking with people. And it really got a flavor for what it was like boots on the ground with political campaigning, and then also what it's like for a politician or a civil servant and running that campaign.
So there's something I wanted to highlight about that story. First off, how you got it, and then how you got to do more was the persistence behind it. In fact, what I was originally trying to title this podcast, that was one of the ones that I considered, was just the idea of persistent. And in both cases, with not getting the internship originally, and then later with the job that you were doing, you just kept kind of pushing. And I'm guessing you did it in a very pleasant way, not obnoxious, but because you kept asking, doors open to you. Rather than, I think what a lot of people do is they kind of just accept their fate, right? Oh, they said no. All right, I'm going to give up. Oh, I'm stuck doing this work for this internship that's kind of low level. I'm not going to ask to do more. And you just kept pushing for it.
Yeah, I found, Dave, that you create your own luck. And I say luck because things still have to happen, but they don't happen if you're not number one, prepared for it, but then number two, willing to continue to ask. And you're right that I wasn't demanding. I wasn't complaining about anything. I did my work happily. And then I said, hey, I'm done with all of this. Is there more that I can do? I would love to help you guys any way I can. And by showing that, number one, I'd already done what I had been assigned, So it wasn't like, oh, you don't want to do what we've assigned you. It's that, hey, you've done everything and now you want more. That they were more open and thinking of, okay, well, how can we get this guy more involved? And
That's so true. That right there too, I also want to highlight is a lot of times people go, I don't want to do this work. And so then they don't do the work. You've got to first do what is required. You must meet the minimum requirements of what people are asking. Then you can ask for more. And sometimes I see people get stuck in that. I don't like doing this, so I'm going to ask for doing something else. Yeah, but first do what you were assigned. Yeah.
It changes the people, the decision makers. It shifts their mentality. And it kind of creates or opens doors that I don't think were there in the first place, but it creates that opportunity when they said, hey, this is what I've tasked you to do. And you were not only willing to do that, you didn't complain. And they know that making copies was not fun. That's why I did it, because no one else wanted to do it. And that's what an intern would do. And that was great. And I didn't mind doing that, but I said, I want more out of this. And there's got to be a way to do that. And by approaching it in a very professional way and in a kind way, right, and not a complaining way, I do think that they started to look for ways to get me more involved.
I love it. And what were you studying at the University of Utah?
Economics.
Okay. What drew you to economics?
I started taking a lot of different general study courses, and I took an economics course, and I really enjoyed it. I loved understanding both macro and micro economics and just like the bigger picture of things, but how the little picture creates the big picture and how important each one of those are. And so once I got into college, initially, I actually was like, I want to be an economist. This is really exciting. This is really fun. But I didn't necessarily enjoy school. And after I graduated and I started trying to apply to become like a junior economist or things, I realized pretty quickly that you had to basically at least have your master's degree just to even be a junior economist. And then if you really wanted to be a true economist, you were going to have to get a PhD. And I just realized I was not going to go get a PhD on that. And so I kind of had to pivot from that a little bit.
So as my assistant and I were both doing research for this, she didn't highlight it, but I actually wanted to ask you about it, which looked like one of your first job, which was doing auto credit, right? To me, I actually found that interesting because my hunch is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, you saw a lot of good choices and bad choices that people were making that brought them to the point when they were about to buy a car.
Yeah. So like you said, one of my prior jobs, I was a manager of a buy here, pay here car dealership. And what that means for people that may not be aware of it or familiar with it is people generally, you can go to a car dealership and you've already gone to your bank and gotten a loan approved from your bank. And then you come here and you say, I'm approved for this amount, and you can purchase different cars. But buy here, pay here car dealership is when you don't have the sufficient credit to get a loan from a bank. And so then you come here, and so we finance people with poor credit or thin credit files where they don't have a lot of history. And you're right that I came across a wide variety of people. I found people who actually made quite a bit of money, but medical debt had crushed their credit score because it was just so much. So they came to us and were able to finance a car. And then we had people who had made poor credit decisions in the past where they had defaulted on loans. And so there's a reason why a lot of banks said, you're too risky of a borrower. And we would say, well, we're willing to accept that risk and we'll finance you. But it was lower priced cars, and the financing terms were a lot shorter than a typical car loan would be. But
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my hunch is that experience informs some of the bigger policy or bigger picture sort of things that you see with the FDIC. Is you're thinking you can now sort of see who's getting affected with it on a personal level because you saw that at a personal level due to that prior position. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it's very important anytime that I'm at a bank and I'm looking at loans that banks have made, ensuring that they are underwriting it correctly and that the people who they make those loans to can repay it, because it does two things. It's very important for the business of the bank, but also on a personal level. You don't want to over lend to someone who can't afford to pay that back, because that puts them in an even worse spot. And so that is definitely something that I paid attention to throughout my career.
So how did you transition from that job and then start working for the FDIC? That happened in 2010. Is that correct?
Correct. So this is a great story, actually, Dave. That buy here, pay here car dealership, there were some wonderful moments where it was great to lend to people who were really in need, and it really helped them out because that vehicle was able to get them to where their job prospects opened up pretty dramatically of where they could apply because they could get to work in time. But the flip side of that was when people defaulted on their loans and having to get the car back. And that was really tough for me to see. And as you can imagine, there were some customers who were not too happy about that and expressed that pretty vocally. And it was a drain on my energy. I would come home every day, and I was newly married. I'd come home from work and my wife would say, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And I'd say, I just got yelled at, or there was some really stressful times and I just need to decompress. But it would be for like 2 hours that I would be so stressed about this. And I just started realizing this, I don't like this job. I don't like it. But I'm a very loyal person. And so I struggled on what to do there, where I felt kind of trapped, where I didn't want to leave and impact any of the people that own that company. But at the same time, I was miserable there. And the most wonderful thing happened. I got fired. And I say that because I really felt stuck. And I don't think that I would have been able at that time to quit, even though it wasn't good for the company, because I would go in, I was stressed, and there were a lot of things in the background there that weren't working for me or for the owners. And I got let go. And I remember calling my wife and saying, I just got fired. And she started to kind of cry, and she was like, "What are we going to do?" And we had a savings account, but this is kind of when this is 2010, we're coming out of the recession. A lot of employers still weren't really hiring, or they're very tentative. And it was interesting because, Dave, I just knew myself, and I just told her, I said, "Look, we're going to be okay." I said, I feel like I have the skill sets that employers want. I've got to figure out what I want to do. In the meantime, I'm going to fill the gaps, right? Because so I built out my resume again. I went to some resume workshops because I'd kind of been out of the job hunt for a while. And I wanted to make sure that my resume was where it needed to be. But in the meantime, I had done gymnastics and competed early on. And so I got a job as a gymnastics instructor and as a judge. And then I also got my commercial driver's license and became a tow truck driver because that was what was available. And I just wanted to bring in money while I was looking for what I actually wanted to do with the rest of my life. And that's where I kind of had this moment where I sat down and I said, what do I enjoy? What am I good at? And that's when it turned to finances. And I just said, I've always really enjoyed finance, and I love economics and that part of things. And I need to find a job that really can fulfill that desire that I have, really to learn more about finance and to teach that. And that's where the FDIC came up.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I have a course on discovering your strengths on LinkedIn Learning. And one of the things I teach in it is you want to find yourself working at the intersection of three things: gifts, loves, and skills. Gifts meaning the things you naturally are good at. Love, obviously the things that you love. And then the skills, the places where you receive training. Like in your case, you got an economics degree. And if you can find a job that combines all three of those, that's the place where success is most likely to happen. And it looks like you were kind of going on the journey to discover that place of your strengths.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to have to listen to that course, Dave, and just make sure that I continue to do that. But that was something that absolutely happened right there. Is I kind of asked myself those questions as, what am I good at? What do I really enjoy? And that's where I need to go. Because up to that point, opportunities had just come to me. And so I just taken those with the car dealership, and even before that, kind of a debt consolidation company. But this was the first time where I said, I'm actively pursuing this, and this is what I want to do.
So you started working for the FDIC. For those who are not familiar, especially someone, because we've got people listening around the world, for those who are not in the United States, what does the FDIC do?
That is a phenomenal question, and it's very important. Most people have actually don't even realize that they may have heard about the FDIC. The FDIC stands for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So back in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, there was a lot of banks that failed. And up to that point, if the bank failed, you were just out of luck. If you had your life savings in there, it was gone. And it was devastating for a lot of the American population. And so the FDIC was established to basically try to instill faith again in the banking system. And they did that by insuring deposits up to a certain amount. And so they said, if a bank fails, we will still insure up to a certain amount of your deposits so that you're not completely wiped out. And that was very impactful because I remember there were a lot of people around my grandmother grew up in the Great Depression, and she was very cautious about cash. And a lot of her friends were very distrustful of banks, even into their old age, because of what had happened. They'd seen what had happened to their parents. So the FDIC was established to try to change that perception, and that, hey, putting your money in banks, if it fails, you're not going to necessarily lose everything. And that's so important to our economy, is that banks are operational, that they can then lend and use those deposits to lend to small businesses, which are basically the lifeblood of our economy.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we have that background about what the FDIC does, where did you start when you began working for them?
So the FDIC has a lot of different divisions. I started in the risk management division. And what happens when you start with the FDIC in the risk management division, you're what's called a financial institution specialist, and you're kind of a trainee. And what I consider is basically for the next 3 years when you first start, it's like a bachelor's degree in banking and regulatory finance, where you go through some core schools and you have mentors and coaches along the way as you go to these different institutions, and you learn how to assess the risk that these institutions are taking with depositors' money.
Interesting. And how did your training in economics and your background in loans and finance, how did that help you in that position?
It definitely helped me hit the ground running. I think that I understood, compared to someone who was maybe just coming out of college, who had gotten an accounting degree or even a finance degree, I had actually been out there actively making loans and looking at tax returns and doing debt to income ratios and a lot of different financial calculations to assess the credit worthiness of borrowers. That came very naturally to me. The thing that I had to work on is something that's also very important, is accounting. And I'd only taken a couple accounting courses. And when I started with the FDIC in 2010, I think my last accounting course was in 2003. So it had been 7 years since I'd even looked at accounting. And there was a lot that I had to then really learn and understand about accounting to ensure that I could fully understand the financial picture of a bank that I was looking at.
So what was the next role that you got with the FDIC? You've been promoted several times, right?
Yeah. So you start kind of as a financial institution specialist, or a FIS, and then you get what's called your commission. And what that does is an actual test that you have to take to demonstrate your overall knowledge of the regulatory banking space. And once you get that, this is very important, because once you get your commission, you become what's called a commission examiner. And you are then authorized to lead an exam team to assess a financial institution. And you write a report on that financial institution, and it's your signature that goes on there. And you basically are qualified as a subject matter expert at that point if there's any issues with your findings, or if banks push back on findings and things.
That's fascinating. It's almost like it's its own like master's degree within the company. Like you're writing a thesis sort of thing, but it's real. It's very practical.
It's very important. And you obviously, if you're going to be out there writing reports and opining on how well an institution is managing the depositor funds, that you really understand what you're doing. And so there is a lot of training that goes into that. And it's a tough road, and not everyone makes it.
So is there a process for continuing education credits? How are they providing that training, and how are you taking advantage of that training?
That's a great question. So once you get commissioned, you do get what's called like a personal learning account fund, where then you can say, hey, there are different courses, or there are different symposiums, or a lot of different events that you can make your case for to say, hey, I want to go to this, someone's speaking about this, or they're talking on these subjects, and I want to learn more about that. And so you can do continuing education credits if you have your accounting degree, right? And you need those CEs to keep that up to date. You can use those personal learning account funds to go and continue to educate yourself. So it's not just the education you learn up to commissioning. We understand that you got to keep up to date and stay relevant on the topics that we're constantly assessing.
That's fascinating. So it's like a budget. It's like a monetary budget that you can apply toward personal learning.
Yeah. Look, I'll preach all day long about the wonderful benefits of working at the FDIC, and I'll give you this is something I often talk about, but I've always been one that I want to make sure that I'm constantly on the right path. And so there have been times where I have looked outside the FDIC and said, okay, what is the banking sector paying? What are the roles that I'd be good at? And I've applied and I've gotten job offers. But as I sat down and I analyzed, okay, I'd be making this much more money, but what are the benefits of the FDIC? And one of the things that they really focus on is work-life balance. And that is so important to me, Dave. And when I look at, okay, I could be making more money here, but what are the hours that I'm going to have to be working at this institution compared to the hours I'm working here? What's the stress level here? How is that going to impact my family, my work-life balance that I have right now? And every time so far, even though I've been offered more money, I've looked at it and said, it's not all about the money for me. It really is about kind of holistically, I just want to be happy in life, and making this much more money is not going to make me happy compared to the amount of time I'm going to have to take away from my family. It's not going to make me more happy.
Yeah. It makes me glad to hear that, because I think the uneducated perspective that maybe I had would be, the government's going to grind people to the ground. They're going to push, and work-life balance isn't going to exist. So it makes me glad to hear that is a part of at least how the FDIC is running things, that they're considering work-life balance. How would you personally, independent of what they're doing, how would you personally define what a healthy work-life balance is for you? What does that look like?
Well, I definitely want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I feel challenged at work that it's stretching me. And so I'm constantly looking for what's coming next around the corner in the banking sector. That's why I kind of got tied to financial technology companies and to crypto and to blockchain as that's coming, and trying to understand that. So keeping myself challenged at work, but then making sure that once I'm home, yes, maybe sometimes I might have to answer an email or check into something, but really when I'm at home, I can focus on being at home and being with my family. And whether that's one of the things that we love to do is we love to travel. Our family loves to travel. And so setting apart the time to travel and to go experience what this world has to offer. And so making sure that I have the type of leave, and that when I'm off work, I can really disconnect and really enjoy and be present in that moment where I'm at.
So speaking of travel, how many days a year are you out traveling? What's an example of a couple of places that you've been?
Well, before we had kids, we used to travel internationally. So there was one time where I took 6 weeks off of work, and my wife and I went on a trip around the world. Wow. And so we went to New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, India, France, the UK, and Iceland. Just hit all of those different countries for 6 weeks.
I'm sorry, wait, you went from New Zealand to Iceland?
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big stretch, even for a 6-week trip.
It was a lot of research and making sure that I understood cultures, because that was another thing, to make sure that while I was there, I wasn't doing anything to upset the culture that I was in or insult someone. For example, I learned in Thailand that the money there has the king's face on it. And, in the US, if you have like a dollar bill and the wind catches it and it's flying away, you try to like stop it with your foot just to catch it. It was considered very disrespectful if you were to ever put your foot on top of the image of the king on that money. So on top of the logistics of where we're going to stay, the things that we're going to see, just researching the cultures. And I think that provided for a more enriched experience in understanding how these people lived and how they may be different from where I came from.
And now that you have kids, you said it sounded like you travel internationally. Now what? You keep it a little closer to home?
National parks. Okay. That's the big thing that we do now. And so we bought a little enclosed trailer where we put all of our camping gear, and so that it's just easier for us to just say, you know what, we're just going to go let's this weekend, or I'll take an extra day off and we'll go up to this national park over here. So we recently, over the summer, we did Grand Tetons and Yellowstone National Park with our 2 kids and just camped out there and hiked and swam in the lakes. And it's so much fun.
So I want to emphasize this for a second, because we were connected by my brother-in-law, Matthew Lorenzo, a great guy. And you're a humble guy. And when we first started talking, you were like, man, I don't know if I fit in with some of the people that you interview. But I want to be really clear, because when I talk about success, I am not just talking about financial success. And I know that you're doing well financially, but what is the point if you can't do the things that you love? And to me, John, what you've accomplished is highly successful because you're doing the things that you love. You're able to maintain that work-life balance in working in this case, a government career. So from my perspective, where I'm sitting, the fact that you make that time and you can take that time in addition to the financial stability that you have, to me, that is a very successful career and life to this point.
Well, thanks, Dave. I agree. I think so. And I do think that sometimes maybe our culture is to look at the people who are just extremely wealthy and say that they are successful. But that's one of the reasons that I agreed to come on the podcast. Is I did think that I love the perspective that you add, that look, financial well-being is part of success, but it's not the only thing. And I agree with that, because ultimately I think that we're all just trying to be happy, and what makes us happy. And for me, that is I want to enjoy things. I love to travel, but I like to do that with the people I love. And so anytime that the opportunities come up, I'm constantly comparing that and saying, how is this going to impact what I have right now? Is it going to increase it and make it better in the short term? Or is there going to be a crunch maybe in the short term, but long term, this is going to make it better? And so I'm constantly weighing those decisions to ensure that I can keep this happiness going.
So one more question about your career. So just last year, you were promoted to supervisory examiner. Correct. At the FDIC. And we've talked, you can't really talk about policy stuff, and I completely understand that. But can you give us a thumbnail sketch of a day in the life of a supervisory examiner? What are you spending your day doing?
That's a great question. I kind of went into what's called the large bank realm. So banks that have 10 billion in assets or more, they get a dedicated team of examiners, because they become so complex that you need a team that's constantly there to understand the inner workings of the bank and all of that. And so I did that for a time, and then I was promoted to a supervisory examiner. And when you become a supervisory examiner, you are given a team of typically examiners that vary in tenure. They can be close to retirement. They can be newly hired.
How many examiners typically are you overseeing?
It depends. Right now I've got 7, but one is an intern that's right now at school, but it ranges anywhere from 6 to 12 typically. Of examiners that you're in charge of. And you're responsible for those newer examiners, making sure that they are hitting all these benchmarks and that they are learning so that they can take that test and pass that test to get commissioned and we're really trying to build up commissioned examiners in the field then that have those abilities necessary to go in and lead these exams at different financial institutions.
And are you working with one specific bank or a couple of banks?
So I work for the Salt Lake City field office, and we have a Salt Lake City territory. So we have a sister field office in Billings, Montana. Okay. And so we'll kind of work with that sister office sometimes, where examiners will go up and help on banks out there. So we cover Utah, Idaho, Southern Wyoming, and Montana.
Oh, that's pretty big.
So that area of all the financial institutions, but we only review, they're called non-member banks. So when a bank gets chartered, they can choose who their primary federal regulator is, whether it's the Federal Reserve or the FDIC. So if they choose the FDIC, then we are the primary federal regulator. So those are the institutions that we're constantly going to and supervising.
Interesting. And I'm assuming you're looking at numbers, looking at data, you're making recommendations to them, that sort of thing. Again, without not getting too specific, but
yeah. So I can tell you a little bit more about that. So yeah, we look at what we call the CAMELS components, and CAMELS is an acronym. So the C is capital, The A is asset quality, so loans, their securities portfolio, anything that the assets that they have on the bank, on the books. And then management is the M, earnings is the E, liquidity is the L, and then S is sensitivity to market risk. And that's typically in the form of interest rate risk. So, for example, the interest rate that they are earning from the loans they make compared to potentially the interest rates that they're paying on deposit funds, right? Your savings account, your money market account, how much they're paying there. And then when the Fed raises rates or interest rates fluctuate, how that can impact their earnings.
That's fascinating. But it sounds like that would really be rewarding, especially for a guy who loves economics like you do.
I do. I love it. And it is funny because when I talk to most people and they ask me what I do and I say I work for the FDIC, their eyes kind of glaze over. Like most of them never even heard of it. And that's when I know that we're doing our job, is because they're not even aware that there's something there in the background that's trying to protect them if a bank fails. They feel comfortable enough in the financial system that they're not even aware of us. Now, obviously there were some failures here that happened in March, and I did start getting contacted as people had questions about things. And it was great to be able to talk to them about that in generalities of things, and just talk to them about the type of insurance that we offer, and point them in the direction of the people that they may need to talk to if they had specific questions about their deposit account at a certain financial institution, and to be able to do that. And it's really rewarding, Dave, to be able to say that I am helping the stability of the financial system within our country. I'm very proud to say that.
That is fascinating. And I like the idea of you really doing your job when people aren't thinking about you. That's a great way to look at it. I'm going to ask you one more question from your perspective, and you seeing the big picture and you seeing what's going on with banks, and even you've gone back to, helping people with auto loans. What is one or two things that you wish more people would do or know on a personal level when it comes to their finances?
Get educated about it. That's the thing. When I worked in those auto loans, there were so many people that they just didn't even understand what a credit score was and why it was important. They said, "Why are you looking at my credit score? What does that even have to do with it? I make this much money." And Dave, you can make all the money in the world, but if you don't know how to manage your own personal finances and you're spending more than you're making, you can go bankrupt. You can be a multimillionaire and do that. And so getting that financial education, and I was able to do that through my degree with economics, but then also really, really in the FDIC and looking at things as I was able to look at so many different businesses and understand tax returns and personal financial statements. I think if people can truly get educated on personal finance, that is going to help them so much in all aspects of any job that they are doing. It doesn't matter what they're doing, because you're more successful if you're not worried about what you're happening in your personal financial life. You can come to work and be there. But if there's those stresses of how I'm going to pay these bills, if I'm going to do these things because you've mismanaged your funds, it makes you less effective at whatever you're trying to accomplish in your day job. Yeah.
Well, if you've got that fear, that concern rolling in the back of your head, I've felt that. And, I talk about the myth of multitasking. Well, you can multitask and you can add stress to your life just because you have a recurring thought that's unresolved. So if you have more understanding, if you've got more control of your finances, that's one less thing to worry about, and therefore you'll be successful in whatever else you're doing in your career.
Yeah. So, Dave, I have a confession to make. As I did a lot of research on you and the podcast, and I've loved listening to all of the different episodes. And one of the things that you talk about that every time I just loved hearing is when you talk about ensuring as part of your education that business and learning about business.
Yes.
And that education is a part of whatever you want to do, because it's going to help you so much. And that's where I tie in business, and I think about personal finance, because in business, it does teach you about finance. And so I just want to echo those comments that many have made over the different podcasts that you've had, is really getting that business education, and whatever you're trying to do is so helpful in so many ways to help you be more successful.
Yeah. And that's something that has come up through the interviews. It wasn't something that I talked a lot about. Maybe I knew it in the back of my head, but as I've done more and more of these interviews, man, that is pretty darn consistent with maybe one or two exceptions. The people that I've interviewed in some way have studied business and gotten an understanding of it. All right, so this is where I summarize some action items that I learned from your story, John, that perhaps I'd share with my kids, or that more importantly, the people who are listening to it right now. If you're listening to it right now, you want to do something about what you heard from John. So, John, I'm going to summarize 3 actions that stood out to me, and then I'd love you to add in one more action at the end. The goal being to not just listen to this, but do something about it. To do one thing. So here are 3 that stood out to me. First one, this came up early in your story, how you were persistent with asking the Scottish Parliament for that internship, and then you kept asking, can I do more? What stood out to me is to not just accept your fate. Don't just accept a no. A no is just the beginning of the conversation. And feel free to keep asking and keep following up in a respectful way, in a polite way. You don't need to be pushy, but just ask multiple times. And John asked multiple times, and that led to interesting and good things happening in his career. The other one, we highlighted this briefly, is to get to know your strengths. And my definition of strengths, and this is in my Discovering Your Strengths course on LinkedIn Learning, is the intersection of your gifts, your loves, and your skills. Take the time to get to know those, perhaps go through that course or just do an inventory, kind of like what John did when he had that turning point in his career, and then ask what position, what career is going to be a best fit for these strengths. And the last one, I like that John, that the FDIC provides that personal learning account. I think anyone can do that. I don't think you need a business to provide that for you. I think you can create your own personal learning account fund and set aside some budget for it. Maybe you set aside, $100 a month or something like that. And then you go to that fund and use that for learning opportunities. You invest it in different learning opportunities, perhaps conferences, perhaps, studying more courses on LinkedIn Learning, wherever that is. Create that fund for yourself and use it. John, what other action would you suggest that people take from listening to this interview?
So one action, and we didn't really get into it, but it's so important, is to not be afraid to admit that you don't know something. And I think that's important because sometimes when I'd ask for additional responsibilities and I'd be given something, I wouldn't know how to do it. And it was okay for me to say, you know what, I've never done this before, but I want to learn how, and I'm willing to learn how to do that. And when people can see that you're not being genuine, that just hurts your credibility. And so early on, I decided, you know what, if I don't know something or someone says something, I'm just going to say, hey, can you explain that to me? So not being afraid to admit that you don't know something, but then go and learn about it, or go and learn how to do that.
Yeah, you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to be open and inquisitive so that you find the answers. I love that. Well, John, thank you so much for sharing your story. This has been fascinating, and I think I learned a lot, and everyone who's listening learned a lot. So thank you so much for giving generously of your time so we can learn from you.
Dave, it was my privilege, and it's an honor to speak with you, and I love what you're doing, and I'm very grateful that I get to be a part of that journey.
Oh, thanks so much, John. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember, it's not just about the knowledge that you gain, it's about the action that you take on that knowledge. So do just one thing based on the story you heard from John Murphy today, and you'll make that story a part of your life forever. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Sound editing was done by my brother Stratton Crenshaw. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bedez. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.